Good evening, everybody. Welcome to History Author Talks. We have a very different show for you this evening, and I'm really excited. Rather than having a book author, we have three guests with us this evening. One of them is a book author. Actually, two of them are book authors. We'll talk about that. But we are doing authors of a different sort. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the Crossing the Musical. The Crossing is a Revolutionary War musical, and I'm very excited to have with us this evening all of the composer, the lyricist, and the dramaturg or the historian who is connected with the program. Full disclosure, I am also connected with this program as an executive producer. Which just means I'm learning an awful lot about producing a musical, which is a lot of fun. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this project. I am coming off of a day where I spent 6.5 hours giving a tour to actually somebody who is in the audience tonight. We had a lot of fun driving around the 10 Crucial Days. You'll see I'm wearing my 10crucialdays.org t-shirt or shirt. And tomorrow I give another tour of the 10 Crucial Days. And in fact, on Friday, I give a third tour. I love giving these tours, and that's part of the story that you will hear tonight. So with this, I first would like to introduce you to our first guest this evening. I welcome to the program, John Allen Watts. John, welcome to the program this evening. Tell us a little bit about you are the composer of The Crossing. Tell us a little bit about how you got to be the composer of The Crossing.
Well, no one else would hire me, so I had to do it. First of all, thanks so much for having us, Roger. We really appreciate it, and thank you for everyone who's here. It's very exciting to see all these faces and people interested in what we're doing. So I'm a native New Yorker. My family goes back to the Revolution, supposedly. That's why my middle name is Allen, A-L-L-E-N. I was told that I was a direct ancestor of Ethan Allen. I haven't been able to prove that recently. But make a long story short, I've been a composer since I was, I guess, at Manhattan School of Music many decades ago. And I've had an interest in composition and theater increasingly later on in my life. So about 10 years ago, I started writing musicals, and then went to NYU for a program called Graduate Musical Theater Writing, and kind of honed my chops there. When I graduated, I wanted a big project to work on, and this kind of landed in my lap. It was an idea that I got from just reading a lot of books that I had avoided when I was younger, and got very inspired by what I didn't know about the Revolution. So I'm a musician, so I felt, well, what can I do? I can take my talents in this direction.
That's terrific. So now we're going to be joined by Jason Huza. Jason is the lyricist for The Crossing the Musical. And Jason, tell us about how you got to become part of this, where you started out and how you became part of this project.
Sure. And again, I wanted to thank you as well, Roger, for inviting us here today. It's a super fun format to talk about our show. So The Crossing is the second musical I've worked on. I have two others, first and a third, that I've done book and lyrics for. I've worked with some people who've had some shows on Broadway, and we actually my wife and I moved to New York. She was a theater major out in Seattle, and I think I had seen Phantom of the Opera, maybe, and that was the extent of my theater experience. And we met when she was still a senior, and part of her curriculum was to take in every single show in Seattle, whether it was a two-person in a closet or the biggest shows at Act and Inman, Fifth Avenue Theater. And we wound up coming out to New York in 2007 for a trilogy of plays by playwright Tom Stoppard. He's an absolute hero of mine. And after we went back to Seattle, we both kind of looked at each other and said, we've got to move to New York. We've got to be close to that energy, just to the theater. So it was, I come to it from a different point of view. I'm not trained in lyric writing, but I just kind of dove I dove right in and met some really talented people. They're all a stone's throw from Midtown. You know, all the best of the best are right there. So I got very lucky just doing some readings, and one of the plays that I had a bunch of spoken verse in it. And one of the actors who had been in a bunch of musicals said, "Have you ever tried your hand at lyrics?" I said no, and he says, "Well, why don't you give it a shot?" And then that show wound up opening in London in 2018. And then I met John, and it's a subject I had an interest in for years and years, and it was a very easy decision to work and partner with John. He's a wonderful person to work with.
That's great. And you also have written some books as well.
Yes, yeah. My wife and I have twins. And the thing about theater is it takes a lot of people to get things done, a lot of people. And the thing with writing books is you don't need anybody. So when the twins were born, I said, well, I can't work on theater for a little while. What else can I do? So I took to writing novels in my spare time from raising our twins.
Indeed. All right, so our third guest this evening, many of you will know, is my good friend and partner in crime at 10crucialdays.org, and frankly taught me most of what I know about the 10 Crucial Days, the Trenton, the Washington's Crossing, and the Trenton and the Princeton campaigns. A wonderful writer and a terrific person to boot. Larry Kidder joins us this evening as the historian. Larry, tell our audience, for those who don't know, your background and how you got involved with this Mishigas.
Hey, thanks, Roger. It's so great to be here with John and Jason tonight. We haven't been together too much because of all the events of the last couple of years, but it's good. Well, I got involved primarily because I am a historian and a writer. I'm a retired history teacher, and I look at the history that I do and the writing that I do as a continuation of my teaching career, not something separate from that at all. I see it as a logical progression. And one thing that I do also is I help out at Howell Farm and work with the horses there, among other things. And because of that work with the horses, I became involved in a project to learn about the New Jersey militia. And that led to looking at a number of things that New Jerseyans did in this area, involved with the crossing and involved with the 10 Crucial Days, that wound up resulting in 4 books. Actually maybe 5 if you count the most recent one. And because I was doing so much research locally, I did a lot at the local historical sites that are involved with the 10 Crucial Days, and got to know all of the people there, and really was welcomed into that community. And so when Jason and John approached the park, visited the park for the crossing, and kind of asked, who would be a good person to help us with this project that we want to do, and give us the, keep us on the mostly straight and narrow historically, who would be the person. And they very kindly recommended me. And when asked, I had no problem saying yes, because it was very early on apparent to me that both John and Jason are interested in this as a learning experience and an educational experience, and something that can be used by groups who, particularly young people, who want to begin to learn about the people who participated in the revolution or in history. One of the great songs in the play concerns the soldiers and the participants talking about what they're doing and recognizing that it's pretty important. And then, but will anybody remember our names? And so a lot of my work in my books has been to try to make sure that a lot of those names get remembered, and we see history as a very human situation.
So, so one of the characters, and we'll talk with John and Jason about this a little bit later, but one of the characters that plays a pivotal role in the Crossing the musical is Jacob Francis. Now we've all heard of George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and all of these, big names. Not many people have heard the name Jacob Francis. Larry, tell us about Jacob Francis and his involvement with the Crossing.
Okay, we only have an hour, right?
Yeah.
Jacob Francis was a New Jerseyan. He was born in Amwell Township back in the 1750s. And he was a Black man, and he was a free man. He had never been enslaved, and he was free his whole life. But as he was growing up, his mother had him indentured out until the age of 21. So he literally worked for another family, a white family, actually 5 different families over the course of his indenture. And he wound up at age 21 in Salem, Massachusetts, in 1775, right at the beginning of the Revolution. And he got right involved with it and joined the Continental Army towards the end of 75 and served for 14 months, including being at the Battle of Trenton. He's interesting as a New Jersey man because hardly any New Jersey men were involved in the crossing. There were no continental New Jersey regiments who crossed. There were only the militiamen who helped with the crossing, but also helped then guide Washington to Trenton, men who knew the roads, knew the neighborhoods and all. And there were a couple of state militia type artillery guys from New Jersey that were there. But Jacob was really unusual in that he was in an infantry regiment right at the heart of the Battle of Trenton and, crossing with Washington. After the war, after the Battle of Trenton, he went and back home to Amwell Township, and he served the rest of the 6.5 years of the Revolution in the Hunterdon County Militia, and was called out on duty regularly and went through just a number of situations, including the Battle of Monmouth, but other smaller engagements also in the militia. And then he settled in the Flemington area and lived the rest of his life there. And today he's buried in the churchyard, the cemetery of the Baptist Church in Flemington.
And on that note, I wanted to share with everybody, this is a plaque that has just been made up that will be placed at that cemetery in Flemington Baptist Church to tell Jacob Francis's story of this Black man who crossed the crossing. And this is going to be a springtime event. So for those of you who live locally, we hope you are going to join us, and you'll hear more about that if you're on the mailing list. I'm encouraging everybody to join our mailing list. You can actually just go to the crossingmusical.com and join the Crossing Musical mailing list. And I'm also pleased to let all of my regulars know that you too are going to be getting updates on the Crossing Musical. We're very excited about this. As I'm mentioning this mailing, the website, the Crossing Musical, we're not going to play any music for you tonight. Frankly, if we start with one, we're going to want to play them all, and obviously we don't have time to do all of that. But there are selections that you will be able to hear of some of the music that John and Jason have written on the crossingmusical.com website. So you'll be able to click on the musical and listen to some of the music of the Crossing Musical. So we hope that you'll visit. So thank you, Larry. That's great little historical tidbits. One of the things that Larry and I do, I mentioned, is that we give this tour of the 10 Crucial Days. So we're while this musical is about the 10 crucial days, it's really a lot more. And I wanted to ask John, how did you get the idea that you wanted to invest your time about a musical about the crossing? And was there any specific thing that inspired you to want to create the musical based on this well-known event?
Well, believe it or not, everybody here besides me probably knew a lot more about it than I did. And it was really just starting to, I knew I wanted to do something. Again, I mentioned my family's had a long, history going back to the Civil War, possibly further. And I had never really had much interest in it, but I did start reading a few of the books on Washington. It wasn't the Chernow book, but it was, I think it might've been the David Hackett Fisher. And I was just struck at how improbable what I took for granted was. And it was kind of like in a moment where I felt, wow, like if I don't know this, everybody in this audience is kind of in a different place than most Americans. And I felt it was very, very relevant to the moment, right? Because for me, it wasn't history. It was now I understood the present moment a lot better. And I felt that there was a path forward, because if they could do that then I thought, wow, if I can help people to remember how this motley crew came together, what does that say about our moment today, in the society that we're living through right now? So I really just felt like it was a calling. Like I didn't have a choice. In fact, I remember looking to my wife, I said, oh my God, I have to write this musical. I had tears in my eyes and I was like, this is a huge undertaking. What am I even thinking?
Brian E. Shepherd.
But that was it. There was no going back. And of course, when I met Jason, it was just meant to be. I've never had such incredible fortune working with someone. It's just totally joyful. It's the opposite of what happened in school where, every collaboration is a bit of a struggle, a tug and war. With Jason and I, it's like, it's joyful. So everything from that moment on has only gotten better. And then meeting Larry and then Roger, it's been just a wonderful trip, and we have a long way to go, but that's kind of how it started. I just felt like it was an obligation.
So your musical has some really wonderful characters. Some are composite, some are true historical personalities. Outline some of the characters in the musical, and first tell us, what was your goal with coming up with these dramatic personae, and how did you settle on the characters that you have, people who took part in the crossing and were involved in the story?
You got to give this one to Jason, because
Jason, yeah, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry. I meant to Jason.
No, not at all. Yeah, that's the fun part. There's a lot of fun parts to writing a musical. But coming up, so what I can, obviously there's two shows right now on Broadway that focus on the Revolution, 1776 and Hamilton, and we can talk about the differences, but even growing up, the main characters in those shows and the main characters of the Revolution get a lot of airtime, right? They get a lot of they make a lot of headlines. They were very important people, and they were tremendous. But what struck me reading this and doing the research on it is just how, just like any moment in history, the individual contributions of the people who were there. It was the story that I wanted to know about. We start learning about Washington at a very young age. We learned about Hamilton, we learned about Jefferson, and as we should, they're all phenomenal people, but how many musicals can you write about the same group of historical figures? Whereas this one, and especially living in Manhattan and living around the New York area, you can't throw a stone without bumping into this history. It's all around us, from the Molly Pitcher rest stop on the highway to General Sinclair has a street named after him on 125th Street, and you wouldn't even notice unless you were just looking around. You say, hey, Sinclair, is that the Sinclair? Then you look it up and said, yeah, it actually is. But Margaret Corbin has a street just at Fort Tryon, which was basically where our backyard is. And Margaret Corbin's story is fascinating, right? Like the first woman to receive a pension from the U.S. military, picked up a cannon in the heat of battle and suffered, grievous wounds. Still, when duty called, she rose up, and it's just, these are the people I wanted to learn about personally. So it just kind of happened that way.
So John told us about some of the reading that he had done to come to learn about some of this. When you and John had connected, had you already read a lot about the revolution? Did you then go research the revolution? How did that come about?
For me personally, I had already read, David Hackett Fisher's book. I had the painting on my wall. I have a Mickey Mouse version of the painting for the boys when they were born. It's just one of those moments, the crossing specifically. I mean, the revolution in general is, moment by moment. You don't need to augment the story to make it entertaining, right? This is really cool stuff in the parts that were in motion and just everything else. So I had read, I had read a number of books, but for this one we ramped it up, and we really, we added about 20 at least, including Larry's wonderful books that were a tremendous source of inspiration and historical legitimacy.
So when we talk about the iconic image of Washington crossing the Delaware, which everyone sort of sees off my shoulder here, is a rendition, which is actually the logo for the musical, and this is, as we tell on our tour, this is the second most iconic image in American military history. And for Larry and I, this happened in our backyard. I mean, we live 15 minutes away from Washington's crossing. And it is a very dramatic image for sure. Hangs in the Metropolitan Museum. And it's inspiring for sure. When John and Jason came down to Larry and I gave them the tour of the 10 Crucial Days. It was kind of fun because as we were going to the different sites, to Washington Crossing and to the battles of Trenton and Princeton, John and Jason were sort of huddling off on the corner, and they were mumbling to one another. And we had a wonderful day that day when we took that tour. And then John and Jason go running off, and we don't hear from them for months. And Larry and I said, well, that was fun, I guess. I don't know what happened to those guys. And then a few months later, I guess it was John who got in touch with us or sent us an email saying, hey, you guys got to come into New York and listen to what we've written. And Larry and I don't even know if we've told John and Jason this story, but Larry and I get in the car and we kind of shaking our heads. What's this going to be about? And we were there. We go into the studio and we start listening. John's off playing the piano in the corner, and they start reading and singing. And Larry and I look at each other and we're going, wow, this is pretty damn good. This is great. We had a great time. And that was what year? That's been like 4 years ago, right, John?
Yeah, I think Jason and I started in 2018. We spent 6 months researching, and then we wrote for about 6 months. I guess we met you along the way.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So John, tell us how does a musical get off the ground? I mean, we're experiencing this. How do we talk about a program like this? How does it get going? I mean, you can't just sit there and write it and we're off to Broadway. What's going on? How does this work?
Well, this is the thing that I've learned in my 10 years now of kind of pursuing this. There really is no single path. It's like every musical that really is successful has its own very unique, it's very different than the film studio business where big corporations come together, they invest a lot of money, they hire the talent, and they know pretty much they're going to get a certain result. Apart from the Disney franchise, it's never worked that way in musical theater. And I feel that that's a wonderful thing. And it's also a very difficult thing. So we are literally inventing ourselves every day. And I'm losing hair trying to figure this out as you're trying to figure out how to help produce the show. So it really is, led from the heart. and basically self-promoted until we, in the case, for example, in Jason's other musical, they happen to hit the right producer at the right time, so things are going very quickly. So it's really just about finding the people who kind of get it early on and then want to basically support it, because it is a very large financial investment. And again, there's many different ways, but there really isn't any single way. And I feel it's actually advantageous to not, have too much of an idea of how it's going to go forward. You have to get to the next step. Our next step is we're doing a rewrite of the entire show, which we hope to have done by mid-November. And, at that point, we're going to be talking to a producer and who's got excellent credits, and she's already expressed a lot of interest. I'm sorry, a director. So that's our next step. And, beyond that, I can't really say, but, we've always had this dream of 2026. Believe it or not, when I started this, I didn't even realize the 250th anniversary was not that far away. But I think Roger pointed that out very early on.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I just want to take one little step back and ask Jason, how did you and John actually connect? Explain the story of how you and John found each other in terms of working on this project.
Yeah, so it was through a network. We have, like I said, I mentioned, I was working on a show before this, and one of the producers was actually part of the Commercial Theater Institute. It's a group that John, I believe, is a member of as well. And, they serve as a resource, linking people, kind of a sounding board within the community. But it is a group of people who are producers in this space. And she and I had become friends working on my other project, and she and my wife are good friends. And, she saw that John was working on a show. She'd been to our apartment, knew that we had the painting front and center right in our living room. And she said, there's a guy talking about a Washington's Crossing musical centered around that. And I was instantly drawn to it, just from a historical curiosity standpoint. But the other thing I'll mention is that show did go to London. And while we were there on opening night, they call it press night in England. It's when all the newspapers and magazines are invited to review the show. It's the biggest night of the show's existence. And while this was going on, it was a wonderful night, and the show, it did everything we wanted to do. I step outside to call my father to let him know how well it went, right there near Trafalgar Square in London. And while I'm looking down at my phone, a guy comes up and asks for a lighter. And I say, I don't have a lighter. And then he pulls a knife and actually robs me on opening night of my first musical being made. So it took a little bit of the wind out of my sails. So John was like, do you want a show that really sticks it to the British? And I was like, yes.
Great story.
I had agreed to work with John before that. I just tell people that now. That's my revenge. But no, that did actually happen though in London. But we got back from London and we got to work. But it's when you have somebody who you're so in tune with creatively and just emotionally, because it is an emotional toll. Sometimes 8, 9, 10 years it takes to get these shows off the ground. So you have to be willing and able to work with somebody that long, and frankly, it's been a joy. So. This is a marathon, not a sprint.
So you mentioned earlier, you talked about some of the other musicals regarding the Revolution. What makes The Crossing different than 1776 and Hamilton?
1776, the entire cast is kind of, the who's who of the Revolution, right? At least from the academic standpoint, it's drafting the Declaration. Hamilton obviously isn't only focused on the Revolution, but it is still focused on the principal characters of the day. And John, feel free to jump in, but I think you've put it before, like this is the other side of the same coin. right? On that side, we're kind of looking at the who's who, and with what we're trying to do, we're looking at the people who aren't remembered by name. You know, Jacob Francis is one of the few people, you know, Larry, with diligent research, found his, you know, his resting place, which is so exciting. But besides Thomas Paine and Washington, our show really is the you know, the unsung heroes, frankly, of the revolution, and that's who we really stay on. We keep a spotlight on those people who, frankly, populate the boat in the painting, right? You know, you have Washington, and then you have probably Billy Lee, and the rest is, you know, who else is in that boat with them. And that's kind of one of the first things that we did was, you know, there's somebody who historically has been looked at as an androgynous person. It might have been a woman. You have two people of color in the boat, at least in the painting. And it's kind of been, you know, a historical pastime to figure out who are those 13 people in the boat. And that was kind of an exercise we took on ourselves to kind of answer.
Jason mentioned Billy Lee. Larry, tell us who Billy Lee is.
Well, Billy Lee was an enslaved man owned by Washington, who was kind of Washington's manservant, if you will. Went hunting with him in peacetime and was by his side throughout the revolution, and, you know, helped him in many, many ways.
One of the numbers in The Crossing is with Jacob Francis on one side of the stage. I don't know if this is still in the show, guys, with Jacob Francis on one side of the stage and Billy Lee on the other side of the stage singing about freedom. That brought tears to my eyes. I thought that was amazing. Tell us how that number came about. John, Jason.
Yeah, I want Jason to really weigh in on this because this was a brilliant idea of his.
So yeah, I mean, so Billy Lee was attached at Washington's hip throughout, you know, most of his life, but certainly through the war and predating the war, just, you know, existing at you know, in Virginia on Mount Vernon. You know, they were really side by side, and all the paintings feature him. You know, he was there. And what I always thought was an interesting contrast, because Jacob Francis is a real person. He was a free Black man who enlisted in the Army after spending 10 years working off an indenture. Honestly, it was just, at least in my mind, a curious moment that conceivably would have happened. But, you know, a person who's on a magnificent horse, which, you know, how many people even rode horses back then? But, you know, a person who is a slave, but is also, you know, dressed to the nines, is standing there with the general and spends all day with the general. You know, what that life would look like to somebody who has nothing, but they are free. You know, a person with a level of access because, you know, they're associated with Washington, but a slave, versus a person who has nothing but is free. And what would a conversation between those two sound like? And yeah, it's one of the moments that in the various readings that we've done and the developmental labs that we've had dramaturgs and directors kind of look at, it's usually one of the moments that we stop on and the room kind of breaks into a conversation outside of the scope of the show, but it happens organically. And, you know, I think everybody is kind of drawn to what that reality would look like. And it always leads to interesting directions, which, you know, to Larry's point, we do look at this as an academic exercise, you know, something that shines a light on the real history of these moments and the real people. So just from an academic standpoint, I've always been drawn to that moment, but I'm glad it worked out for Roger.
So, you know, for those of us who read about the revolution and military history, there might be 400 books written about the battles and actions and strategy and tactics, and for every one book written about women involved in war. Those aren't the real numbers, but I'm trying to make a point here that oftentimes the women are seen just at the home front and not really involved with the troops. Larry, can you give us a better sense of what the reality was with women traveling with the troops?
Well, there's a number of facets to that. Aside from women who got involved in combat, like Margaret Corbin and Molly Pitcher type women, there were just a lot of women who traveled with the Army, because the Army in the 18th century, regardless of what country it was basically a traveling community. It wasn't just a bunch of soldiers marching. And so a lot of the soldiers had their wives along with them, their kids. There were people who were civilians, but who worked for the Army in various ways. And some of those were women, some of those were men. Women would help out very often because they were required to, in order to get fed. To be fed by the Army, to get rations from the Army. They had to take part in washing clothes for the soldiers, sometimes cooking, although the soldiers tended to do that in small groups themselves. Certainly tending to wounded and sick. Very often women helped out with. But everywhere the soldiers were, it was not just a man's community, if you will. It was a multi-gender community, and that was true throughout the war. In different situations, it might be more or less. If they're, for example, the last almost year of the war, when the soldiers were encamped up along the Hudson River, the New Windsor area, and the war had pretty much wound down militarily. There might be a lot more women hanging out, and living with their husbands when they're on an expedition into enemy territory, going to Yorktown, something like that. It might be a little bit less, but there's still going to be a certain number of women involved.
So now I'm going to ask a related question to John and Jason. I remember from my days and being in high school musicals, and my daughter is a drama educator. One of the things that schools have to look at when they're deciding what play to put, what musical to have for school, and is how many parts are there for the girls and how many parts are there for the boys, and are we going to have a diverse cast? In putting together your show, John and Jason, did you talk about this? I mean, did you talk about, well, we've got to have this many women and this many men? And I mean, how does that evolve, practically speaking, and from a marketing perspective, and just from a creative aspect? And using what Larry just said about these women were really a part of the story that are not discussed that often. John, Jason, what do you think? Did you think about how many women that you were going to write about in a program?
It wasn't a conscious decision at the beginning. That being said, it is a musical, and it would be a complete shame to exclude the types of voices that you can get, in these shows. And so it wasn't a conscious decision, but again, in reading, just the women, they're everywhere, right? They're everywhere in this story, and you don't have to strain the imagination for them to be all over the show, all over this moment. It was just a matter of finding the right places, and we're still tinkering with that. But out of a show with 13 songs, I mean, we have six or seven that are led by women. And again, in readings that we've done, the actresses that we've had involved have definitely brought up the fact that a Revolutionary War show, they didn't anticipate that it would have this kind of balance to it, which was absolutely intentional. But I think it makes for a stronger story. Because we're talking about the people who are unsung from this era. It was wartime, right? I mean, I think of A League of Their Own, right? That wasn't the only time in history where people who had to kind of band together to keep the world going. And so it's not a stretch of the imagination at all to kind of populate our show with the people who were rightfully there and deserve to be recognized for their contributions.
So pre-COVID, we were lucky enough to be welcomed by Washington Crossing Historic Park. The Friends of Washington Crossing Historic Park were very welcoming to us to put on our first reading. And the reading includes the music. And we had our first sort of opening night, if you will. And after that, and we handed out questionnaires to people. What did you think? What did you think of this character, that character? What did you think of the music? John and Jason, maybe John, you can start with this one. After that first initial reading, again, this was pre-COVID. No one knew that we were going to be all hunkered down for 2 years. What did you and Jason come away with after that first initial program? You obviously met very shortly thereafter that wonderful night. It was a grand night. I thought we had a lot of fun. All felt very good, but you immediately got to work in polishing the show. John, what did you guys do?
Yeah, well, thank you for getting that questionnaire back to us. That's always something that you do after a reading. It's really a way to get an honest response from the audience. I mean, look, people were in tears afterwards. That was a good sign. And, people that I trusted were there, and that was great. But the thing that really surprised me is, I'm sure Jason would agree, when that particular version of the show had a particular device of having the unknowns and their story and plotting their creative arc, and then parallel to that, we had the general scenes with Washington. So we had this kind of a contrived device that we thought was a good idea. And it was also a nice thing that we could use the same actor, for example, that was playing the unknown, he could play the general. So there were a lot of reasons why we tried this device. But even though, like Jason said, we wanted the unknowns to be the focus, and what we were interested in were, who are these people in the boat, right? And it was a very diverse group. And that was a huge draw from the beginning. The fact that it was a diverse group. There's probably a woman in there, possibly, who knows, it's a Black person. So we wanted to bring that out, but we still were really impressed with Washington and his generals and found them interesting. So we created this device, and it seemed that after the show, I don't know if it was quite that clear to you, Jason, but it's, looking back on it, it seems like people were really interested in this journey of these unknown people, some of whom were fictitious, but represented, what we had researched. And they just didn't seem to have much interest in our generals. We had a very good, strong song that kept developing called Resolve. But yeah. That was the big takeaway. So we knew we had a big rewrite after that, and we knew that the generals were going to diminish, and that has continued to this day.
Right. Everyone's heard their story, So tell us too about how the character of Thomas Paine has really sort of grown. I mean, he was almost a character off to the side in the very first rendition of the show. Tell us how Thomas Paine has we now have a growing pain, as it were.
Yeah. No, I definitely want to share that, because when we met Larry, it was very instrumental in understanding, first of all, the 10 crucial days, right? So we know it was 3 battles. was also wonderful because we had an African-American character that had a different name. It was actually a historical figure. It was Oliver Cromwell, not the other English guy, but yeah. So then Larry kind of brought us to Jacob Francis. The way we got to Paine, and I want to backtrack for a second because I want to just point out that every element of the show Jason had in the first draft, and I always tell him that when he's, what are we doing? I say everything has been there since the beginning. And Thomas Paine had the very first line of our very first draft, or very close to it. So, like Jason also mentioned, our backyard is living history. And I moved to Yonkers in 2017, just as I started writing this show. And the Thomas Paine Cottage Museum is 15 minutes away. Took me a year and a half to get there. So I go to the Cottage Museum, and in similar fashion to what happened with Larry, kind of blew my mind. And I realized, we had a true hero to bring out, and to kind of build up his role in the show. And really the way we understand his role was that he was really the great light of the Enlightenment and the effort. And so we hooked up with a scholar named Gary Burton over there, who's actually heading up a new edition of the collected works of Thomas Paine, which is not out. And I'll just share this as it's a fascinating thing. He was much more influential than people have given him credit for. Probably wrote most of the Declaration. We've seen drafts of his work, and also was so ahead of the curve in terms of abolition and equal rights for women, and was consistent from beginning to end. So yeah, so that's kind of how Paine, and just also the way Jason writes the character, he's so much fun. So we really have a hero in that regard. Even though it's not about him, he's sort of there, and he's kind of the foil that people are, being influenced by, and he's being influenced by them. Because remember, he starts writing the American Crisis in the first scene of our show, which is the element that's going to basically, Washington is going to use to rally the troops before the crossing. So he's not just thrown in there for, the element was in there at the beginning, and now we really understood how important it was for him to be integrated into the whole plot.
So anytime I tell people I'm involved with a musical, the very first thing out of their mouth is, "Oh, is it going to be on Broadway like Hamilton?" Sure, let's buy a lottery ticket. As John said at the beginning of this program, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of resources behind it. John, I'm going to ask you first. What are your goals for this program? What would you love to see happen with the Crossing, the musical, besides being on Broadway? Sure,
Right. Well, besides Broadway 2026,
Yeah.
I wanted to set that goal because, why not? It belongs there. But truthfully, we would just like to get this into a good regional theater that's going to be respectful about the story. And from the beginning, and I credit Jason's wife, Denise, with this idea, because she was one of our early producers, and she pointed out to me and Jason, I think, the educational side, which is that this really could be the centerpiece of a great curriculum that we're hoping Larry will spearhead. So that would be even better than Broadway if it could become a musical that high schools, colleges, institutions throughout the country could produce, and we could get a living history. And then from there, we could spin off all kinds of, additional episodes or serials, or, we want it to be the centerpiece of a curriculum that's inclusive, and it sheds light on the lesser known, facets of the revolution. We already have the great books, and there are many books that are going to continue to be written. But we want kind of open people's eyes and to, oh, wow, identify with that, hey, we're all invested in this American project, this American democratic experiment. So I want it to be, a historical centerpiece of an educational curriculum that can be, living history, and, just part of a whole curriculum like that.
Jason, what about you? What are your thoughts about your goals for a show like this?
Yeah, well, obviously, Broadway is Broadway's Broadway. It'd be great, but there's a million wonderful theaters in this city, and this history is so of the area. The Fulton Opera House in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The history is around there. Bucks County Playhouse in Pennsylvania. The history is all around there. New Jersey, New Hampshire. I mean, all up and down the East Coast. There's parts of the story that touch on almost every locality in some way or another. But from I think the university route would be a lot of fun, or even high school route. And to your point, we might be removing some of the generals, but half of the show takes place in a forest. So we have unlimited people who can play trees. I mean, we could build a whole stage with trees. That's not a problem. But, I was born in Montreal, and one of the things as a kid in Montreal, you learn, or in Canada in general, you learn American history, right? Because Canada, you learn Jack Cartier and, Terry Fox, and then the rest is American history. And there's this weird little, like, wow, their history is so cool. There's almost a history envy, being a student in Canada to American history. And, that's something I think, the more palatable, the more accessible you can make it to younger people who want to learn. I think the history is just amazing. And this is just another way to kind of bring that story across, because I was fascinated with it as a kid. And, I think the regional theaters, I could just see families bringing their kids to go see a show like this and having a conversation afterwards. And that's really the strength of the show. And while I think it could fit anywhere, that's what really gets me excited about this project.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in, Roger?
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of, I personally look at this as an experiential thing, not just an audience thing. The people involved in putting the production on at wherever it gets put on are going to, the actors are going to get immersed in the characters. They're going to be thinking about the characters, analyzing them, etc. And from that, they're going to branch out to look at the other characters that they're interacting with. And those conversations between the actors are going to spill over to their other social groups. So the whole school could be talking about the characters even before they see the play. And then the play bringing things together and perhaps launching additional conversations and additional interest on the part of people. So I don't look at it just as a production to bring an audience to, but the people involved in doing it also being the learners as well as the audience.
So I'm going to take host privilege here and give you my thoughts as well. One of the things that I feel very passionate about, particularly now, is that we as citizens should feel lucky that our nation was founded on the ideals of the Age of Enlightenment. And particularly as Thomas Paine has grown in character, the more one reads about Thomas Paine and Thomas Paine's writings, the more one learns about these ideals of the Age of Enlightenment. Who are we? What is our foundation? And I am I was one of those people who was moved to tears as well as laughter. I mean, there are some numbers in this, some of the musical numbers in this program are just, you will just scream with joy. They're so much fun. But there are a number of songs that really move you and really make you think. And I think that they're very accessible to both children and adults and high schoolers and people of all ages, races, and gender. And it's one of the reasons why I'm very, very passionate about this project. But I think that as we move toward our nation's 250th birthday, it's more about just waving flags. Quite frankly, in 1776, flags were not a big thing as they are right now. Everyone's waving flags. But this nation isn't about waving flags. It's about what those documents really said and what was it that we were really after. So I'm going to stop lecturing. But suffice it to say, Jason mentioned a few times, there's wonderful regional theaters up and down the East Coast. Well, I belong to several hereditary organizations whose members live throughout the country. And the California Society and the Texas Society, the Sons of the American Revolution are huge. And part of their mission is to talk about our history. Well, this is real history. And it's not textbook history. Larry Kidder will tell you as a history teacher that you don't always use the textbook. In fact, the textbook was rarely used in Larry's class, as I understand. And it was all about learning about the real people. And I think that John and Jason have done a wonderful job in putting together something that is not only educational, but a lot of fun. And the music is really terrific. And I will tell you that that there's a fun movie in the public history sphere that starred many years, that starred Alan Alda, called Sweet Liberty, which was really a lot of fun. He was an author who had written a history textbook, and they made a movie about the Revolutionary War, and Alan Alda spends the rest of the movie running around saying, "Oh my God, they're ruining history." It was a lot of fun. The movie was very, very funny. Well, John and Jason have really done a lot of their own homework. And when they had questions, they came to Larry, and Larry said, well, this is kind of more how it happened. And they incorporated that. So unlike Sweet Liberty, these guys really listen, and they have taken history and they have really created something that I think is going to help us as citizens teach our fellow citizens of all ages. So I applaud the work, Jason, that you have done, and John, your music is just fantastic. And of course, Larry continues to churn out terrific books on the American Revolution. And what we would really like to know, John, now is if people want to be a part of this, what do they do?
Yeah, just go to our website. We have a website called thecrossingmusical.com. You can sign up for our mailing list there. We haven't used it that frequently, but I plan to use it more frequently soon. We do have a Facebook group. If you go to Facebook and look up The Crossing Musical, you can join us there. If you want to lend a hand in any way, or if you have any area of expertise, as you said, Roger, we really are listening to everybody who has constructive input or resources, ideas. We also have a YouTube channel. We just put up 4 songs that were done live at the Thomas Paine Cottage. And so if you sign up, I can send you information. And on the website at the bottom, there's my email and a phone number. You can call me or email me. But again, we do have that YouTube channel where we're putting up live. We did 4 nice live videos. So that's the way that people can sort of get started. I'm glad you're able to navigate that site so well. You're doing a better job than myself, Roger. I just want to thank everybody for being here, by the way. It's really just wonderful to see people interested and staying till the end. So I appreciate that.
So I want to thank John and Jason and Larry. And tonight, what we're going to do, rather than me just saying goodbye, I will say thank you all for joining us this evening. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play one number, which is very appropriate for me to say goodbye to everybody. This, to set the scene, is after the Continental troops capture the Hessian garrison in Trenton, and they are now have crossed back into Pennsylvania, saying goodbye to the Hessians. So with that, I will play Auf Wiedersehen. Good night, everybody.
We were whistling snow and various song was heard. The German guards were yelling hard asleep when something stirred. From out the woods across the field, they had to rub their eyes when a motley group of farmers took Trenton by surprise. Our frozen toes be damned into this cold we'll never see. On its way, that Hamilton pat his cannon like a steed. Sent a volley on filleted up King Street with a scar. Caught the bastards dozing, and we knocked their bullocks off. Our sergeant said there's rifle shooting from the second floor. He wasn't sure which houses, so he sent me door to door. I found a Hessian aiming down his sights into our lane. So I threw him from the window when I said, Auf Wiedersehen. Auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen. Auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen. Auf Wiedersehen.
Well, sorry about that. Didn't realize that if I shifted screens, it would end. But so good night, everybody. And thank you for joining us. And this program will be posted on History Author Talks. And we look forward to seeing you for our next program. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
Take care.